A. Enter at the working walk, proceed down center line to C without halting. Watch the test yourself this first time, and then we'll be looking at it again and talking about it, and then we'll look at it a third time and score it. C, track left. HXF, change rein, lengthening the horse's stride and allowing the horse to stretch forward and down. F to K, working walk. K to E, shoulder 4 between K and E. E to M, change rein. M to H, continue working walk to H. H to E, shoulder 4 between H and E. E to F, change rein. F to K, working walk to K. Between K and E, prepare to trot. Between E and H, working trot, continue to M. M to F, lengthen the stride. F to A, working trot. After A, turn right onto the quarter line. Quarter line, leg yield left from the quarter line, arriving at the rail after E. E, H, between E and H, circle right 20 meters twice, allowing the horse to stretch forward and downward on the first circle and then developing the working trot on the second. Between E and H, continue working trot to M. MXK, change rein, lengthening the stride in the trot. K to A, balance the horse after the lengthening. After A, turn left onto quarter line. Quarter line, leg yield right from the quarter line, arriving at the rail after B. B to M. Between B and M, Circle left 20 meters twice, allowing the horse to stretch forward and down on the first circle, then developing the working trot on the second. Between B and M, continue working trot to H. HXF, change rein, lengthen the stride in the working trot. Between F and K, transition to walk. K to X, working walk along the diagonal. X, down center line, between X and G, halt and salute. Dismount, stand quietly for a moment. You may reward your horse. Take the reins over the horse's head, run up the stirrups, and leave the arena, leading the horse at its shoulder. I want to thank our associate trainer, Marnie Micky, who's in New Jersey, by the way, in Basking Ridge, for doing such a great job of pitching in and riding all these tests on her horses and a lot of her students as well. So great job, Marnie. We appreciate it. It's going to help everybody in the long run. So we're going to take a look at the test again, this time without it being read, and we'll talk about what's going right and what's going wrong and how that might affect the scoring. So the first thing we always have to ask ourselves is whether or not the horse is working over its back or not, because remember, it calls for a working walk, a working trot. And unfortunately, what happened with the USDF is this started becoming a very vague thing about what this actually meant, and we begin to lose our principles, and now we have horses completely upside down scoring really, really high because they never really were consistent about what they were calling a working gaits and whether that was correct or not. So here, that's the first thing in our scoring system. You have to have the horse over the back in each movement in order to get the first number 1 point for each movement. If you don't get that number 1 point, you would get a 0 because you're not actually doing what's actually being asked for in the test. And that's where we hope to differ and avoid many of the confusions that the USDF ended up with. So I would say that this horse is clearly working over its back. It could be a little more engaged at times, and it loses engagement at times, but it is in a working walk enough that we can say it's not getting a 0, if that makes any sense. We can see that she loses it sometimes, but if we look at the walk here, now that's really quite a nice working walk we're seeing. The neck could be out just a little bit longer, but we can see how the underside of the neck is completely relaxed. There's no tension, and the walk is regular and 4-beat. We see the USDF these days, we see many horses scoring very, very high that are completely hollow, and that's what we want to get away from. So here we see in the leg yield, they're the first, shoulder 4 on the circle. That was pretty good, lost a little bit of rhythm. You can see it takes her a moment to get back in. Gets a little tense for a moment here and there. But he's still working over his back. We can clearly see that there's a 4-beat walk, stepping up underneath himself. There's no tension in the other side of the neck. So we know we're going to get that first point, at least for most of the time, unless we see him completely disengage and go hollow on us somewhere in the test. But at this level, this would be considered a good working walk. Once again, it's pretty rhythmic. Once in a while, she loses it. Now we see here, this is the second shoulder 4, and we can see that she never really got the horse off of the rail. The neck came in, but the body did not. So that would have been a fault there. And we can see he's not quite steady in the bridle. Sometimes he wants to come up and down, but it actually gets better as she goes on in this test. But we're still clearly in a working walk. Very nice and light in the reins there. So that's really getting a little better there. So the neck has come out a little bit longer, so the walk becomes a little more steady and lifting. Now, at this point, we would like to see, if we're looking at the rider, per se, we'd like to see her lift her chest up a little bit. We'd like to see her shoulders come back a little bit and her elbows come into her sides a little bit more, which means that she needs to shorten her reins just a little bit at times. And we can see he starts off a little bit unsteady, a little bit on the forehand there. And as she begins to proceed there, he starts to look a lot better, starts to look a little more like a good working trot. Good steady rhythm. Could have more lift in it, but once again, remember this is at the first foundation level, so we have to expect a certain amount of that. So on our circle here, that's a really good stretch. He stretches right down. That's what we'd like to see, that he takes it right on down like that. Gets a little unsteady there in the circle, but good stretch there, good flow over his back. And then in the second circle here, she needed to lift herself back a little bit with her shoulders. She's gotten a little bit forward, and that's tipping the horse a little bit forward and causing him a little bit of difficulty. So she could stretch her shoulders back a little bit there at that point. And he's a little bit unsteady in the bridle, but once again, he's not completely hollow either. So we can still call this a working trot, if a little unsteady. You can see as she changes the rein, he tries to come off the bit a little bit. We get a little wagging in his head if you see that a little bit, and it gets a little bit out behind on that, but she recovers well. Also remember, for any of you who are in the process of taping rides, we always want to keep the horse in the middle of the frame, if you will, and as large as possible in the frame when we're taping. Once again, pretty good stretch here. Starts down, but doesn't go down quite as easily or as far as he did on the first circle, though that's an improvement. Still could have gone a little deeper into the stretch. Never got to where we would have liked to have seen it in that direction. However, there are a lot of things that we do like about this test, and that the horse stays quite relaxed throughout. Now you can see when he makes that turn there, kind of loses his balance there, the neck comes up a little too high, disengages just for a moment, but she gets it right back again. And you can see as he turns off, every time he seems to change directions, you can see how there in the middle there, he starts to come, his head comes up a little bit too high, he starts to lose his back end. Now we have corrected this. She should have been walking in the middle of that short side there, but I think that was a little confusion on the test itself, how it was written. But we have changed all that, and in the test now, that trot transition is made between the two corner letters, meaning at A, in other words. Very nice halt at the end, very obedient, stands very nice. That's a really nice square halt, stands beautifully during the dismount. So that was very good and would score very high. So now we're going to go through again and we're going to score the test. And that was really nicely done, leaving the arena. That's what we want to see, is that the horse can stand there without getting anxious. So important. A, enter at the working walk. Proceed down center line to C without halting. C, track left. Good center line, good rhythm. Shows a little bit of resistance to the bridle here and there. Change rein, lengthening the horse's stride and allowing the horse to stretch forward and down. Lost a little balance on that previous turn. 4.
F to K, working walk.
Not enough stretch and broke gait. 2. Now I took a 1-point deduction for the break there.
K to E, shoulder 4 between K and E.
Pretty steady working walk there. 6. Slows down
E
a little
to
bit
M,
in that, and a
change
little
rein.
bit resistive in the bridle.
M to H, continue
4.
working walk to H.
Little unsteady in the bridle on the
H
change.
to E, shoulder 4
4.
between H and E. E to F, change rein. F to K, working walk to K.
Never really got the horse off of the rail. 1. Losing the rhythm and engagement on the change. 3.
Between K and E, prepare to trot. Between E and H, working trot, continue to M.
Good perspiration. 5.
M to F, lengthen the stride.
Trot transition 4 was a little unsteady.
F to A, working trot. After A, turn right onto the quarter line.
Not enough lengthening, did not start soon enough. 2.
Quarter line. Leg yield left from the quarter line, arriving at the rail after E.
Good turn onto the quarter line. 5.
E, H. Between E and H, circle
leg yield,
right
6.
20 meters twice, allowing the horse to stretch forward and downward on the first circle, and then developing the working trot on the second.
Stretch started well in this direction, but could have stayed deeper a little more consistently before coming up on the second circle.
Between E and H, continue working trot to M.
A little bit inconsistent there. 4.
MXK, change rein, lengthening the stride in the trot.
A little inconsistent, comes off the bridle. 3.
K to A, balance the horse after the lengthening. After A, turn left onto quarter line.
Didn't engage enough from behind in the lengthening. 1.
Quarter line. Leg yield right from the quarter line, arriving at the rail after B.
Better
B
in the
to
balance
M.
on the
Between
turn there.
B and
4.
M, circle left
Leg
20
yield,
meters
5.
twice, allowing the horse to stretch forward and downward on the first circle, then developing the working trot on the second.
Needed to be stretched a little deeper in the first circle. Drifting a
Between
little
B
bit
and
in
M,
the second one.
continue
4.
working trot to H. HXF, change rein, lengthen the stride in the working trot.
Better working trot there, but a bit inconsistent. 4.
Between F and K, Transition to walk.
Better lengthening, but not enough engagement from behind. 3.
K to X, working walk along the diagonal. X, down center
A
line.
little hesitant in that downwards transition. 4.
Halt and salute.
4 on the working walk along the diagonal, still a little inconsistent. Excellent. Halt.
Dismount,
7.
stand quietly for a moment. You may reward your horse. Take the reins over the horse's head, run up the stirrups, and leave the arena leading the horse at its shoulder.
Really good work here. Horse patient and quiet while the rider dismounts. No anxiousness. 7. Now we'll let it run in the background here while we talk about the collective marks. Horse's correct level of physical development for the level entered. The horse stayed over its back through most of this and consistently, even though it was a little inconsistent in the sense of the head moving up and down, a little inconsistent in the bridle, but developed well enough to do this, but just needs to be a little more consistent. So we're going to give her a 5 there. Harmony between horse and rider. Now, we never saw the horse get resistive, and that's very important, that the horse doesn't just ever outright resist the rider at any time. She does a good job of working him back whenever he gets a little out of the contact or it disengages on the rider. So a pretty good level of harmony between the two of them. Nothing that just stands out as, as terrible, if you will. So I would call that also a 5. Rider's correct level of physical development for the level entered. This would include the rider's seat and correct use of aids. In this test, as I said earlier when we watched it, I'd like to see her get her shoulders lifted up and back a little bit at times. I'd like to see her be able to shorten her reins at times and let her elbows come into her side and lift her chest up. But she has quite good use of her legs, though they could be stretched a little bit deeper, and her heels could stay down a little bit more. And we're going to give that a 5. Artistic impression. Now remember, the artistic impression is very much dependent upon the consistency of the horse. That's what gives us a good artistic impression. So to score high in the artistic impression, because this is also a coefficient of 2, remember. So that is going to be taken into consideration in terms of the artistic. This is really when horses get so steady in the bridle that it becomes mesmerizing to watch. That is the biggest thing that affects the artistic impression. And of course, then things like, weight, size of the rider for the horse, things like that give us a nice balanced impression. But, she's a good size for this horse, so no problems there or in any of that. But it's just those inconsistencies that happen throughout the test that cause this to be a fairly low score relative to what it could be down the road. So as to our artistic impression, which is probably generally brings, if you think about that, the artistic impression brings everything that we've talked about kind of under one roof, if you will, as a score, which we're looking at the horse, we're looking at the rider, and the overall impression that we get. And while it's not bad, it could have been a lot more consistent, the things we talked about. It's all those little things that are coming off the bridle here and there, shortening sometimes, speeding up, slowing down, that add to that. So I would give her a 3 on that, this level. Now remember, that's coefficient of 2, so it's going to be twice that amount. Good job, Marnie. So the calculation for that score would have been a 53.75. Now, we always used to think in dressage that, if you weren't breaking 50%, that you didn't belong in that class. So she did break 50%, but we can see how just these few things of getting more consistently over her back, more consistently in the bridle, more consistently engaged, a little more lift in the stride will begin to raise those points. But for if this were a young horse just doing this, just beginning this work, this is about what would have been a respectable, let's look at it that way, would have been a respectable score for a first time out there. Once again, it would have been a 53.75. So once again, thank you, Marnie, and we'll see another one of her tests here very shortly. This is Will Faber from Art to Ride. I hope you're enjoying this process. and I look forward to seeing many of your tests in the future.